I built the boat in this series in the winter of 2019. As I record this intro right now, it is the middle of March of 2020, and we're in the midst of the coronavirus. My wife just put her hand on my forehead to see if I had a fever. I hope everybody's safe, in good health, washing their hands, maybe doing a little social distancing, hanging out in their shop, and boat building. I thought you guys might appreciate a break from all the bad news on the television and the newspaper and watch a little bit of boat building for now. And so in this episode, I'm going to be working on finishing up the sanding and getting some stain on the boat. So we'll be doing a little bit of masking to have different color stains and to keep the accents showing up nice and bright. And I'll start off with filling some of the gaps that inevitably show up in any build I do. So let's get right to it. I have a few small cracks where I didn't have good tight joints between the strips. So I'm going to fill some of those up with a little bit of a sawdust mixture. So I've got my cyclone here, which collects the dust as I sand, and I dumped it out before I got started. Get some of this, it's good clean stuff. So that's cedar sawdust. I found that even though this is the wood that came off the boat, it ends up being darker when you mix it up here like this, just because of the fine powder. It just absorbs material, resin, and so forth more. So I'm going to add a little bit of Cabasil to kind of lighten it up a bit. And then I'm going to add some water to it. And a little bit of glue to act as a sizing to sort of bind it all together. So there I have a putty, which I can spread into the cracks and seal them up. Part of what sealing up the cracks does isn't just visual, it's to keep the epoxy from just running straight through and leaving sort of a bubble there. So this will help fill those up. So here I have a little crack I'd like to fill up. It's pretty thin. I could just epoxy right over this, and frankly, you probably never even notice it. But figure I might as well see if I can fill that up a little bit. So I'm going to take and put masking tape on either side of it. That way I don't end up getting a halo of glue sealing up the grain and the wood around the issue. And I'm just putting the material right where I need it. And take a putty knife, take some of the putty, press it down in there. Peel off the tape. Let it dry. I'll be coming back and sanding this, and it'll knock the top off of that and make it smooth and even. I'll give the whole boat a final overall sanding with 120 on the longboard. It gets rid of scratches from the last 120 sanding, deals with some of these places where I put a little putty in the cracks, and also last thing I did before that was wet everything down and raise the grain, so this will flatten that raised grain. So I've done the major overall sanding. Now I want to hit some details. It's always difficult to get the very edge here at the shear line sanded all the way out because it's flexible there. So you push on it, it just flexes away and tends to get shortchanged in the amount of sanding it gets. So I'm going to sit down and use a small sanding block and take care of that. Then there's some places on the deck where around the recess it needs a little bit of detail sanding, and I'm just going to inspect it as I go, see if I see anything, and I can deal with it as I go. So now I've got the deck and hull all sanded out, ready for the next step, which in this case is going to be staining. I could go directly to fiberglassing now if I weren't going to stain. So each pass I did took like half an hour to do the whole boat. So the first 60 grit over the whole thing, about half an hour. Then I did 60 grit on the longboard, another half hour. And then 80 grit with the random orbital, and then 80 grit with the longboard, and then 120 grit with the random orbital and 120 with the longboard, then a little bit of detail sanding. So there were 3 hours of sanding to get it to this point, which is quite a bit of time spent sanding, but it goes pretty quickly. The thing to remember to make sanding as easy as possible is be intentional in what you're doing. So know what you're intending to do. So the first pass is to level things out and ferret it out. So we want that to go as quickly as possible. It's about removing material. So we want to move material as quickly as possible. So for that purpose, we go with really coarse grit and a really powerful sander. And so we're just removing material. We're trying to make it level. So we're not trying to erase mistakes. We're trying to lower high spots. So you don't go around and say, oh, there's a spot that looks like it needs work, and try and dig into that spot. That's going to make a low spot. If you see a place where there seems to be an issue where it's uneven, feel for the high spots and knock down the high spots. Again, we're being intentional in what we're doing. Also, to save time, be systematic in what you're doing. So don't just sort of bop here and there. Oh, I see something over there. I see something over here. Work from one end of the boat to the other, then back up the other way. Work on it systematically so you're not going over the same spot lots of times. This was pretty easy to ferret out. The strips were laying down fair, they were fitting tight, they were even. The cove and bead helped make the strips nice and even. I saved time in my sanding by making sure I had the strips fair and smooth when I put them in place. Every step of the way, we're trying to make things fair and smooth, and that way, when it comes time to do the real hard work of ferreting it out, you don't need to do a lot of work. So once we get it all fair and smooth and leveled, we are done trying to get rid of problems. There might be a few here and there that we missed, but if you feel when you get to the next grit that, oh, here's an issue, I've got to work on this, you were better off doing that with the coarse grain, and when it goes faster, trying to fix problems with the finer grain just as slow. We want to use the most aggressive, fastest tool we can to get the job done, and so it's done quickly. I know people are scared to use coarse grain sandpaper, but it takes a lot of work to sand all the way through the boat, and you're most likely to do that if you're trying to spot fix things. The whole intention of the 80 grit sandpaper is only to get rid of the scratches from the 60 grit sandpaper. And then once we're done with the 80, we go to 120, and the reason for using 120 is to get rid of the scratches from the 80 grit sandpaper. If you're finding swirls left over from the 60 grit, you probably didn't do enough with the 80 grit. So as you go with the 80 grit, inspect the surface, look for scratches in it that are the swirls from the 60 grit. You'll be able to tell the difference. Sand them away. So do your process systematically as you go, trying to get rid of the scratches the whole way. It doesn't take a lot. You just need to be intentional in what you're doing, knowing what you're trying to accomplish, and concentrating on accomplishing that task, and then move on to the next task. So there is a lot of sanding in strip-built boats. It's a given. And the goal is to make the sanding as easy and quick as possible. And when you're doing it right, it's a really satisfying project. You're seeing changes. You see how you're improving the boat with every step of the process. If you're not seeing it make any difference, think about what you're doing. Are you doing something that's worthwhile? If it doesn't look like it's making a difference, do something else. If you see something that needs to be fixed and what you're doing isn't fixing it, think about what you need to do to fix it. So be intentional in everything you do, and it'll go quickly and it'll be fun and you'll have a beautiful boat. I put some accent strips, some contrasting Alaskan yellow cedar in along the feature line where I have this chine. Basically it's a hard angle on the deck, and where it fades to a soft angle, I end up ending that accent strip. I like to put in something to sort of highlight a feature, and this is a feature, and so I'm accenting it with my little pinstripe there. The thing is, I want to stain this whole boat, and as a consequence, if I just stain right over here, I'll pretty much hide that accent strip. I don't want to do that. I put a lot of effort into putting that strip in there. What I've often done is just gone ahead and stained everything, then come back and scraped off that accent afterwards, so the stain doesn't sink in very deep at all, and just a light scraping right across the surface, across the stain, and it ends up popping again, so you can see the nice accent. What I did with my last boat was I tried putting some epoxy on this accent strip just before staining. So put epoxy on there, let it dry. So then there was some resist that kept the stain from actually penetrating into the Alaskan yellow cedar. I think I'm going to try something similar today. This time I want to go ahead and get stained today. If I put epoxy on here, I'd need to wait 12 hours for that to dry, and I don't have the patience for that. So I'm going to give something a try. I'm going to use some CA glue and put that on there and spritz it and let that harden up, and that should be a nice resist for the stain, and I'll have that accent showing pretty crisply after staining it. So I'm going to put masking tape on either side of the accent. Blue tape here instead of the green tape I often use, because the blue tape does not stick as well. I want it to stick, but I don't want it to peel grain. And I don't want to create a rough spot by putting a really aggressive sticking tape on here and peeling up grain as I peel it off, and then having a place where the stain reacts differently due to the texture of the wood. Science experiment. Then I'm going to try and put a bead of CA glue right down on top of that. Looks like it may have worked all right. Give that a chance to set up. Take a look at it. There's a few places where strings of glue pulled off as I peeled the tape. I might be able to sand those out. It looks like there's a nice bead right on top of that accent. There's a little bit of bleed off into the cedar, but there's going to be good contrast there anyways. I think that'll work out fine. I have an accent strip on the hull also. Again, this accent highlights the feature line of the chine back here. And I have the same problem. We're going to be staining on both sides, and so I don't want to stain on the accent stripe. But I have a slightly different solution for this one. My intention is to have a two-tone here, so the bottom of the boat will be stained, as will the side of the boat, but I'm going to use a lighter stain on the bottom than I am going to do on the side. So to accomplish that, I'm going to mask off with masking tape at the accent stripe. I know I'm sort of a messy worker, so I'm going to take some of this masking film and put that along, and I'll put that below the accent stripe, and I'll use regular masking tape to get just above the accent stripe. The goal is to have the masking tape and the edge of the masking tape above the line, wrapping down below, so it's covering the line. I'm going to leave a little bit of the natural wood showing above the accent stripe, and the accent stripe is going to have a little bit of natural wood color on either side, just a skosh. I specifically chose a high contrast wood on either side of the accent stripe here, so if I don't get color all the way to the accent stripe, it'll still look right because there'll be a nice sharp contrast there. Again, the goal is to come by with the masking film so I don't spill any stain down the side of the boat, and I'm going to do the bottom first, which is the lighter colors. So if I do end up getting stain on the side of the boat, it'll be a lighter color, and the darker stain should hide it. But again, I'm going to try and mask it off and protect it with this masking film. I'm going to use this light red mahogany stain on the bottom, and I'll use a darker blood red on the sides and the top. I've got a clean rag. I'm going to put the stain on the rag fairly heavy and wet, wipe down the whole boat, and then come back with denatured alcohol and wipe down the boat again. This is an alcohol-based stain, so it dries really quickly. As such, it tends to blotch, so by coming back with a wet alcohol rag, I can even out the color. Let that dry and then do the side. Now with the bottom stain dry, I'll mask off the accent strip on the other side and then do the side of the boat and work on the deck. Blood red for the side and the deck, so it should be some contrast between the side and the bottom, but still reddish. Good. I will let that dry, and tomorrow I should be able to get fiberglass on. So that's it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll get some fiberglass on the boat. So you may know that I make my living primarily through the sale of plans to build your own small boats, such as this kayak and other boats I have. So if your boss told you to stay home and do some social distancing and quarantine in place, and you've been looking to build a boat, now maybe is your chance. Unfortunately, it looks like we may have a lot of time when we gotta stay away from people, and maybe it's a good time to just be in your shop and hang out and work on an interesting project. So if that project's building a boat, I have plans available. Come by my website, check it out, see what I've got. Otherwise, whatever you have, it's a nice time to be in the shop and keep away from people. But seriously, and more importantly, it's a time to stay safe and keep your family safe and do what you need to do. Wash your hands, buy more toilet paper, whatever you need to do. So until the next episode, stay safe. Thanks for watching and happy paddling.